Rohingya refugees protesting moves to send them back to Myanmar. They fear a rerun of the horrors which forced them to flee to Bangladesh in the first place. But Bangladesh wants them to go home. So does the repatriation deal violate international law? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine. The United Nations described it as an act of genocide, the military crackdown in Myanmar last year against the Rohingya minority Muslim population. 700,000 fled across the border to Bangladesh to escape rape, murder and other atrocities as their villages were razed to the ground. Now, a deal has been made for them to return home, but many don't want to go. And for the moment at least, it appears that the plan has been put on hold. We'll join our guests in just a moment, but first, Mohammed Jamjoom reports from the refugee camps in Cox's Bazar.
This is the week when, for many, trauma became terror. When Rohingya refugees who'd escaped so much violence were shocked to learn they might be repatriated to Myanmar.
I've been crying because of how sad I am that we might be sent back. Our relatives were killed in Myanmar. We were all persecuted there so much. We came here to Bangladesh to find peace. This is a peaceful country, but we're not at peace because we've been told we are on a list.
That list is the reason there's so much fear in this place. It includes the names of thousands of Rohingya refugees who've been chosen as candidates to potentially be sent back to Rakhine State as part of a deal between the governments of Bangladesh and Myanmar. Minyara Begum tells us her camp leader informed her that she and her 3 children are on the list. But she says they'd rather die than return.
We drink poison before we go back to Myanmar. If it looks like they will try to move us, my children and I'll buy poison from the market here and we'll drink it.
The government of Bangladesh insists repatriations will be on a voluntary basis only, but Minyara is not convinced.
The atmosphere here is filled with an increasing sense of dread, and several of these huts that used to house refugees now sit empty. That's because people are so terrified that in the past few days, at least 5 families have fled this camp.
The United Nations Refugee Agency, which does not believe current conditions in Rakhine State are conducive to a safe and dignified return of refugees from Bangladesh, says there are approximately 485 families on the repatriation list.
For us, it's very important that we first do this assessment of voluntariness. This is really a basic condition for us. And the refugees not only have to decide, they have to decide based on knowledge. They need to know what's going on there in Myanmar. They fled from Myanmar a little more than a year ago. Before they return, they have to know what's going on there.
But many refugees say they're all too aware of the horrors that await them.
We don't want to go back to Myanmar because the camps they would put us in there are worse than the camps we are in here. If we go there, we won't be able to pray and our children won't be able to go to school.
For now, members of one of the world's most persecuted minorities continue to worry they may be victimized all over again. Mohammed Jamjoom, Al Jazeera, at the Jamtoli refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh.
All right, time for us to introduce our guests now. In Ankara, in Turkey, we have Khin, who's a Rohingya activist and president of Burmese Rohingya Organisation UK. In Colombo, Sri Lanka, we have Omar Waraich, who's deputy director for South Asia at Amnesty International. Welcome to you both. Can I come to you first, Khin? We've just seen an indication of how much fear and dread there is among the Rohingya in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. They fear going back under this repatriation scheme back to Rakhine State in Myanmar. What's going on in Rakhine State?
Yes, we need to look at why these people been fled from Burma. You know, these people face genocide in Arkan state. That's why they fled. First thing we need to look at. Secondly, you know, we are receiving information same as how you are receiving. The people been hiding, the people been fleeing from one camp to another. And we receive information that more than 150 Rohingyas taken to Ongsi Para camp, which is a transit camp. We still do not know what's happened, but as far as what we received, the repatriation will not happen. Did not happen on Thursday.
Yeah, we understand. Tun, let me just interrupt, because we do understand that this whole deal has been put on hold, presumably because of the amount of concern that's been expressed. But going back to what you were saying, why is it that people are so trepidatious about the prospect of returning home? Home, after all, is where most people would like to go. They're living in desperate, dire conditions in camps in Bangladesh. What is it that is making them so hesitant, so reluctant to go back home?
Yes, this is very important point we need to look at. These people are living such a squalid condition in Bangladesh refugee camps, one thing. Secondly, why they are not returning to their homeland? Because they face, you know, some, for example, let me bring you one example. Like one person, he lost his brother. His brother was slaughtered in front of him, and his sister was raped, and his house being burned down, and he cannot go to original place. And anytime his family go back to Burma, anytime they can face mass killing, slaughtered, or other human rights abuses, they can face anytime in Burma. There is no such a guarantee for safety, protection, and also full citizenship, and no basic rights at all. We need to deep down to the bottom line. Why they are not going back?
Absolutely.
Why they are so scared? Because the such mass atrocities they face, and genocide is until today, until now, 15th of November,
that's a critical point.
Genocide is ongoing in Rakhine place.
What are you saying then is actually going on today in Rakhine State? And what are the provisions that, as far as you understand, what are the provisions being made for any potential returnees?
As far as what we can see, there is Burmese government and Bangladesh. They're talking about this repatriation is just to Burmese government side is just to show international community to aid where international pressure is growing up to take back these refugees, one thing. And secondly, there is no such consultation with Rohingya people. You know, it is very important that we need to, the international community and UNHCR, UNDP, Burmese government, they sign an agreement. That agreement, they did not consult with the Rohingya. So the important thing we need to look at Rohingya leaders, activists, the representative from the Rohingya camp leaders, they should consult with them. Without consultation of Rohingyas, there is no way to return.
All right.
And without guarantee of their full citizenship right, without guarantee of protection, we need international protection.
All
because
right. No.
we still genocide is ongoing. There is no guarantee from anything.
All right,
you know,
all right.
I want
Fair
to point
point.
out here. Look,
Tonkin,
international community been raising up the issues.
Right.
Let me
get you to hold that
same
thought.
Time when they talk about repatriation, they must.
Let me interject, because we need to also bring in our other guest, Omar. Omar from Amnesty International, who's talking to us from the Sri Lankan capital, Colombo. Amnesty International. What does it make of this deal, and what's your understanding of its status right now? We believe that it's been put on hold, at least temporarily. What is the status of it, and what's your thinking of the overall deal?
Well, we're very relieved to know that the deportations haven't taken place, because if they did, this would be a very reckless move. The conditions in Myanmar are not conducive to these returns. We're not convinced that these returns would be safe, voluntary, and dignified, and therefore they would not meet the conditions under international law for such returns to take place. As far as Amnesty International is concerned, and the UN confirms this as well, crimes against humanity continue to be committed against the Rohingya. in Rakhine State, the system of the cruel and entrenched system of discrimination and segregation, which Amnesty International has described as amounting to conditions of apartheid in Rakhine State, has not been dismantled. There's a system that made people so vulnerable in the first place. And as Khin said, I mean, we're very concerned that the Rohingya weren't consulted in this at all. And going back to Mohammed Jamjoon's reports, this is a terrifying situation, and we hope that the better sense prevails.
So why do you think the Bangladesh government has entered into this agreement without any UN involvement, any UN monitoring of the deal? I mean, do you believe that the Bangladeshi government has been precipitous to get into this arrangement when it sounds very much as though nothing has changed on the ground in Rakhine State?
Well, the different reports on that, it seems as if UNHCR is in touch with the Bangladeshi government. They are trying to vet or verify this situation and for these refugees, whether the conditions would meet safe, voluntary and dignified returns. But the issue here, Martine, is that Bangladesh sees the situation as a burden on itself. Remarkably, at a time when many countries have turned their backs on refugees, they've forced them back in many cases, a low-income country, low to middle-income country like Bangladesh took in more than 700,000, as you mentioned.
It's perfectly understandable, Omar, isn't it? I mean, according to the World Food Programme, it costs $800,000 per day to feed 1.1 million refugees. I mean, that's a burden that Bangladesh can really ill afford, especially given the shortfall in international funding.
So this is the real scandal. The scandal is the shortfall in international funding. We've heard thunderous condemnations of Myanmar's behavior and sympathy for the Rohingya, which is all very welcome, of course. We've seen, states come into play at the UN Security Council, at the Human Rights Council, and that's great. But what we haven't seen is a commitment from the international community to look into sustainable long-term conditions for the Rohingya in Cox's Bazar. I mean, after all, earlier this year, the UN made a very modest appeal of $950 million just for the Rohingya's most urgent needs. I mean, that's scarcely $1 per refugee, and yet those situations, scarcely $1,000 per refugee, and those conditions weren't met. It's an absolute scandal. We're approaching the end of the year, and only a pitiful 40% of the appeal has been committed.
Indeed.
So while
Omar,
we may cast blame at the Bangladeshi government on this, we also have to look at the attitudes of the international community.
Absolutely. 634 million is the sum, apparently, that is missing from the international commitment. So where do you think international efforts should focus? Should they focus on improving the conditions in the refugee camps for the Rohingya refugee population, or should efforts be directed at Myanmar and Rakhine State and improving the situation there so these poor people can eventually go home?
Well, frankly, both, I think. We need to see the Myanmar military held accountable for the crimes against humanity they have committed. Unfortunately, we've seen very impressive and promising steps towards that, but very little delivery on that front. I mean, we'd still like for the UN Security Council to refer Myanmar to the ICC. We're supportive of the ICC investigation based on the crime of forced transfer of population that the prosecutor announced. But there needs to be more sustained pressure on the Myanmar military, hold them accountable, dismantle the conditions of apartheid that exist in Rakhine State, ensure that the conditions are conducive for them to be able to return. I mean, after all, I've been to the camps there, and like Mohammed Jamjoon, who's been reporting for you from there, we've encountered people who this was not their first journey across the border. Some of them have been forced across 2 or 3 times. So how do you ensure that this doesn't happen again? That they aren't vulnerable to another military offensive that forces them to seek refuge in Bangladesh, and then for them to be languishing in limbo and constantly imperiled and worried about being forced back across the border?
Yeah, absolutely.
Into Myanmar.
Yeah.
And into the conditions where they are vulnerable to the very people who committed the most horrific crimes against them.
Absolutely. Coming to you, Khin in Ankara, what are the potential dangers of having a vast number of young, completely dispirited, vulnerable and hopeless young men? I'm wondering because the Bangladeshi government has expressed some concern that some of these young men may be persuaded into the armed struggle. I'm talking about the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, of course. I mean, is this a potential that concerns you at all, that many young men, given these dire prospects and the bleak conditions in which they live, could become more radical, could decide to take up weapons to fight?
When we talk about that, we need to look at the situation of Rohingya. Many decades Rohingya have been facing genocide. You know, we are peace-loving people. There is, in Burma, there are other parts of the country, you know, Khin, Shan, they have armed groups. Rohingyas are the only group looking for the political solution for many years. When we look at people become, as UN Special Reporter Yang Healy mentioned, when we look at ARSA, you know, that desperate individual have taken desperate actions. People be rounded up by the military, that's the thing they attack. And so we've been advocating for the solution of the Rohingya, you know, international community like US, UN, UK, EU, and others. You know, look, this is unbearable situation people been fighting, people been facing. They are in Bangladesh camp, it's not a healthy atmosphere. Anytime anything can happen towards Rohingya, or people be persuaded with many other ways. So this is a responsibility, not only Bangladesh, international community, to restore the full citizenship rights and protection for the Rohingya. We need to deep down look at the solution. You know,
absolutely, but Tun Khin,
people become desperate and people become hopeless. Sometimes things can happen that way. So, as we mentioned, we are advocating for the political solution through peaceful means. That's what we are trying. But
the problem seems to be
people may go longer. Any group can persuade them. We never know.
Absolutely.
That's why that is responsibility
but Tun Khin,
of course, Bangladesh worries from their side is okay, but international community like United States and United Kingdom and EU countries, they know this is going.
Tun Khin, we've seen just this week.
Where is the international community?
Just this week,
where is the international community voice to bring up the issue? We need to look at that when you talk about other issues. This is very important.
But Tun Khin, just this week, we've seen Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States, publicly, internationally dressing down Aung San Suu Kyi at the ASEAN summit in Singapore. Nothing seems to make a difference in terms of the international condemnation. There's been a complete slew of it over the past year or so with regard to the behaviour of the Myanmar government, and nothing seems to have changed. Do you really feel that the Rohingya community who've been displaced so dramatically, do you really think that they're going to be able to return home?
That is the point. You get into the point, you know, what I was talking about. International community, they are given lip service for more than, since 2012, a stronger lip service is going on. We have not seen any effective international action. And, you know, we have seen that sanctions been calling targeted sanction military, and, you know, we have not seen anything what Burmese government have to, you know, something effective pressure to the government. Of course, we have seen, we appreciate Vice President, US Vice President concern and raise the issue, you know, for the Rohingya. But they need to setting up timeline and benchmark is really needed. You know, they are ignorance. Aung San Suu Kyi, one time she was an icon. Now she is defending the military. She is complicit in this genocide. So, genocide is ongoing. UN fact-finding mission reported UN Security Council last 3 weeks ago. So we have not seen the government action.
All right.
UN is
let me just
fact-finding mission already. Chairman Mazuki mentioned
Yes,
Where is the
exactly.
government gone? They are
let's put this to Omar now.
You know,
let's put this to Omar Tung Khin. Omar, because as Tung Khin points out, there has been a huge amount of international pressure, but he's calling for effective international intervention. What exactly could that be?
Well, I think holding the Myanmar military to account for its crimes against humanity through the International Criminal Court, for the Security Council to make that.
The problem is, of course, all the time in the Security Council, I mean, the Myanmar government is supported by China. It's protected by China.
Yeah. No, it has been. And that, I mean, sadly, the structure of the UN Security Council is such that people can have this abusive veto where they protect their vassals in different parts of the world. So it is important that pressure is applied on China, that China understand that you know, having a situation like this on its own doorstep is unacceptable and actually will undermine its own regional interests, after all. It has already been a source of deterioration, you know, for the relationship, for the plans it had in the region, for its relationship with Bangladesh. This will cost them. I mean, after all, we do have the other route in that the ICC has taken on the crime of forced transfer of population that I mentioned earlier. There have been targeted sanctions imposed by certain countries. The US has looked at them. Canada has looked at them. It would be more encouraging if others did so. It's very important that other countries, you know, not allow the Myanmar military to be treated as somehow respectable statesmen of any kind. And in this case, I'm thinking of a lot of countries in the Asia-Pacific region. I'm thinking of OIC countries. I'm thinking of countries that are members of blocs like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They can't allow this. On the one hand, they do condemn and they pay lip service to what has happened, but we haven't seen the levels of international assistance, and we haven't really seen them distance themselves from the Myanmar government. After all, the protection that the Myanmar government enjoys right now is because it has the support of the giants of the region, India and China. We need that situation to change.
And Tung Khin, when you sit and you look at the prospects for your people who are suffering in such a horrific and continuous way, where do you see the possibility of change? And I'm presuming that this repatriation deal between the governments of Myanmar and Bangladesh, you would like to be scrapped completely.
I think, you know, we need to look at, before this repatriation, to talk about why Burmese government is so serious about repatriation. We need to see this question, you know, but they want to ease international pressure. Why not international community? They raise in, oh, repatriation cannot. It is too early. The situation is still not safe yet. Why not they talking, they pressure in Burmese government to restore the full citizenship rights and to stop you know, genocidal acts against Rohingya in Burma, where 500,000 Rohingyas are in Rakhine State now. You know, 120,000 are still in IDPs. They are not getting proper aid. And Chokta, you know, Miao U, Butidang, Maungda, still in Butidang Township, there is, you know, many Rohingyas, they are not getting access for food and medical aid and fishing in Chokta, Pokta. People are living still in camps. So they have to treat Rohingya equal citizen like other nationalities of Burma. That need to be done, the first thing, before anybody talk about repatriation. Secondly, we need to look at, as an internationally, protection is the most important. 1978, you know, 275,000 fled. They repatriated back because of international pressure, not as a citizen.
All right.
You know, they were stateless within our in the state.
All right.
And 1991,
I'm afraid
repatriated
we've run out of
again.
time.
So this cycle of exodus, cycle of genocide is ongoing. So this need to be stopped. This is important. We need to look for the solution. Effective pressure putting on Burmese government.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tung Khin. Thank you very much indeed. Omar, Waraich, thank you as well. Thank you both for taking part in this programme. And As ever, thank you for watching. You can see it again anytime you like by going to the website aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And there's always the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis, and from the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.